You're kidding yourself if you think cutting taxes today is really cutting taxes. We're simply deferring massive tax increases into the future, unfairly and immorally putting huge debt burdens on future generations.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV. Today we're talking with David Stockman, a former congressman who is best remembered as the budget director for Ronald Reagan. David, thanks for talking with us.
Good to be here.
You're back in the spotlight and getting roasted again by your fellow Republicans because you've been an outspoken advocate of letting all of the Bush-era tax rates expire. What's your rationale behind that?
Well, philosophically, we should have as low taxes as we possibly can. The problem is you're kidding yourself if you think cutting taxes today is really cutting taxes. We're simply deferring massive tax increases into the future, unfairly and immorally putting huge debt burdens on future generations.
There's a presumption there that if we raised more federal revenue, that would go to pay what we're actually doing now, as opposed to just give the government more impetus to grow even faster.
Well, that's always a risk, but I think the fact is there isn't much pressure for structural expansion of the budget right now.
Does there need to be, though? Because, I mean, Medicare spending is set to continue to expand, particularly after 2020. I mean, so there doesn't need to be a politician saying, let's create whole new entitlements, because we've got ones that are on autopilot to explode, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, in addition to allowing the tax cuts to expire, we need to means test radically the retirement entitlements.
Let's talk a little bit about your kind of political philosophy and economic philosophy. You came into the Reagan administration and you worked long and hard on coming up with the way to cut taxes, right?
Right.
What did Reagan cut the top tax rates from?
All right, the top tax rate on earned income was 50% at the time, and I think we ended up in the low 40s. But what happened subsequently was almost no spending was cut. And the defense budget soared out of control. We knew going in that there was a commitment by President Reagan to rebuild defense capability. But what happened in the early days was that the Pentagon distorted campaign promises for real growth of 5%, which they then raised to 7%, and Reagan went along. And then they started it from a much higher base, which is to say a supplemental bill. And as a result of that, defense spending got totally out of control.
Between 81 and 85, basically the Reagan administration doubled the national debt. What would you have done differently, knowing how things played out?
Well, I think you would really have to sit down and make some very large and honest conclusions. And that is, what is the welfare state that we're going to keep because we don't have the political will to change it, or we believe it is necessary? How much defense do we really want? Let's lay it out. Let's justify it. And if that's 24% of GDP or 20% of GDP, then what is the optimum tax system that will raise 20% or 24%, as the case may be? The last honest war president we had was Truman. Surprisingly. And when the Korean War budget ballooned, he demanded the Congress institute major tax increases, excise taxes, income taxes, to pay for the war on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Is the triumph of politics that we don't even get to have those conversations, or that we'll have them but then we don't really stick ourselves to it, we don't keep to a budget?
Well, first, I think we need to have the conversations, but then we need to recognize the underlying demographic context of what the steady state claim on GDP is. And the whole entitlement structure, retirement entitlement, Social Security, Medicare, it's an intergenerational Ponzi scheme. The baby boom is now inexorably moving towards retirement and beyond. And so therefore, the share of GDP that it's consuming continues to rise. The current generation of workers are going to be turned into tax slaves, just like the workers in Ireland today are finding out that they are. And that will have to change, but it'll only change when the crisis comes
Now, in the New York Times over the summer, you laid one of the four deformations of the fiscal apocalypse on the heads of pointless speculation in stocks, bonds, commodities, and derivatives. Are you arguing that essentially that this trade only existed because of regulations or of a government system or a political economy where people knew if they were playing around with that kind of stuff that they would get bailed out?
Well, I think it goes beyond or further back than that. I think it goes to the closing of the gold window in 1971. It goes to the destruction.
And that because the last shred of anchoring the U.S. dollar to a gold standard.
Yes, and because that system, as it had its defects, Bretton Woods, but at the heart of it was a fixed exchange rate system and an obligation on each company and country, including the United States, to settle its accounts at the end of every year. And if you began to run chronic payments deficits, you were going to, under that system, lose your monetary reserves. Now, when we got rid of all of that and went to pure fiat money, it began a process in which financial volatility and instability reached what had been previously unimaginable levels. And so if you have exchange rates careening all over the place, if you have interest rates soaring and then declining and then bouncing to and fro, the market will invent hedges. So I think much of this massive 700 trillion derivatives market which is out there was fostered by the breakdown of fixed exchange rates and the anchor of the monetary system to a asset, gold in that case, that couldn't be manipulated for short-term purposes by governments and central banks.
Do you, do you see anybody in the political arena who is, who gives you hope or who seems to get what you're talking about?
I think the heart of the problem is our monetary system is out of control. There's only one guy who understands it. It's Ron Paul.
Right. Well,
there's no one else who understands it.
He's newly ascended in terms of power, right?
That's true.
And, so do you think that will be the beginning, or could that be the beginning?
Well, I think maybe it'll begin to disinfect the process. Maybe it'll begin to shed some light on all the pretensions and the scholastic arrogance of the Fed's economists and the Federal Reserve itself, and that maybe is at least a small step towards beginning to address the real problems in this country.
Well, David Stockman, thank you very much for a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. You're kidding yourself if you think cutting taxes today is really cutting taxes. We're simply deferring massive tax increases into the future, immorally putting huge debt burdens on future generations.